Hello friends, welcome back to True Love Stories Hub. I'm no longer monetized by YouTube, so if you like my content and want to support me, please check out my Patreon. Thank you so much for being a regular viewer of the channel. Divorcees who were married over a decade. What ended your marriage? We were married for 12 years, just had our first baby after buying our dream home. She was in a wheelchair due to childbirth complications, and I was caring for her full-time and taking care of the baby. After 6 weeks of paternal leave, I went back to work. She met some losers in an online video game, and they spent all day, every day talking. We were locked down during COVID, and she never met him in real life. I found out what was going on when the corno videos she was filming of herself in our house to send to him synced to the tablet we shared in the living room. We were in divorce proceedings before our baby was 1 year old. Story 2. We were married for 10 years, and he just kind of changed over time. I think it really started with the pregnancy and birth of our first child. From there, things just went downhill. He did less housework, never cooked, left me with the kids while he went out, got me to pick him up at all hours after drinking with family and friends, controlled the finances, would spend it on the credit card, consolidate it into the mortgage, and claim he wouldn't do it again but never cancel the credit card. Rinse, repeat. He hurt his back at work, no help with anything now. Now we need a bigger house, a new car, a home theater system, a PlayStation, and a leather lounge suite, because that will help him get out of the rut he's in. He wouldn't get out of bed except to play Skyrim until 2 in the morning. The blame and the threat started. I didn't give him enough physically. It wasn't the kind he wanted. I didn't initiate enough. If I left, he'd make sure I had nothing. I knew he was depressed, but asking him to help when he couldn't do anything was apparently me trying to make him feel terrible. He checked the money and I never had any. Yet it was my fault we were broke and he had to use the credit card. Buying lunches, dinners, coffee, and going out with his friends was the only way he could feel good about himself, and I just wanted him to feel bad. I did all the cooking, cleaning, and looking after the children. He did what he wanted. In the mix were his family, and he had me cooking, making cakes, and sewing quilts for them on top of everything that was happening at home. It ended when he offered me to one of his friends who was in a bad marriage where he wasn't getting intimacy, supposedly, so I would give him that. His friend was lovely to me. We talked, sent messages of support, held each other, and cried. That man taught me martial arts and encouraged me to stand up for myself. When my husband realized how I felt about this man, he called me a lying, cheating, or even though we never actually did anything, and he left. That became the story everyone knew about why we weren't together anymore, and I accepted it. First, because I was used to taking what he said, otherwise he would explode even more, and second, because I felt like he was right. In my heart, I loved his friend, and I would have gone with him if I'd had the chance. It took a lot of time and therapy for me to realize how beaten down I was and how the kindness of that man was like a life ring in a storm. It was either hold on to that or drown. I've been with my current husband for 10 years now, and can't imagine even looking at another man. Looking back, I can't believe how much I endured or how I let him blame me for the failure of our marriage. Story 3. There was only one person trying me, whether it was solving issues or just day-to-day things. He was able to come home and dissolve into his gaming chair, and I came home after a day's work and picked up all the slack. I suggested counseling after years and years of trying. He said no. That was my cue. No communication from the other half. Ironically enough, he is going through counseling with his new girlfriend. His choice. Tell me how much he valued our marriage. No loss there. Story 4. After 21 years of marriage, 25 as a couple, she became an alcoholic. Childhood traumas she wouldn't deal with made her become alcohol dependent for the last 3 years of the marriage and pushed me to my breaking point, mainly because she refused to admit there was a problem. We divorced, which she did everything she could to drag out and make acrimonious. My children, now grown, came and lived with me. She died of liver and multiple organ failure within 4 years of the divorce. While highly stressed at the time, the whole thing makes me sad now. Story 5. My husband started a relationship during my treatment for my brain tumor with someone from our pharmacy, began hitting me out of anger, left me and my daughters for said person, and married her a week after our divorce was finalized. The new wife sued me for emotional distress because she was upset. He was convicted of domestic battery and sued my 12-year-old autistic child for emotional distress because she was mean to her. Can't make it up, lots of therapy and a horrible sense of humor to survive it. Story 6. My parents were married for 25 years when my mom was in a serious car accident, started taking classes at the local college for the first time, and was then diagnosed with breast cancer, all within 6 months. The youngest sibling was 16 and the rest of us were out of the house. My dad decided he wanted to be a kid again, and cheated on my mom with his friend's wife. They didn't divorce until 15 years later, so they were legally married for 40 years, but they were separated, living apart, and dating other people. They kept trying to get back together every couple of years, but one wanted fewer responsibilities and the other wanted to be taken care of. Edit to add, it was difficult for my siblings and me to reconcile that the man we looked up to so much was the same man who broke our family. The relationship between us and our dad has never recovered. Story 7. Together nearly 23 years, married for 18. Found out at Easter she was cheating on me. The emotional trauma is unlike anything I've experienced in my life, and both my parents and brother died. I eat half a meal a day. I've lost 30 belbs. In 2 months, I can't focus at work. I'm lucky to be able to take a 3-month stress leave. I wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. with panic attacks and dry heaves. I start shaking randomly, and I can't concentrate on any distractions like podcasts, music, video games, or TV shows. Getting out and walking or talking with friends is the only thing that helps. Every cell in my body wants to get as far away from her as possible, but we have 3 young boys I'm not leaving and a house that was intended to be my inheritance before we bought it from my mom, a home that's been in the family for 70 years, so that'll be an expensive legal battle. Story 8. We had children. It triggered his latent avoidant tendencies, and he avoided me for half a decade before I was finally able to drag the truth out of him. He never wanted to be married and never wanted to be a father. He stayed out of obligation and duty, but he was miserable and took it out on me. Never the kids, just me. You can feel sympathy for someone while also being betrayed on such a fundamental level that you never want to see him again. Sometimes I miss the man I married, but he never really existed. He was a mask for a guy who really ended up being a jerk. Story 9. The first 8 years were great. Then she got weird. What she herself had called an amazing marriage suddenly wasn't great. She rewrote history and blamed me. I got us into counseling. I spent vast sums of money and made all the changes she wanted. It was a year of hell. Then the counseling worked, and things got better. Then one day, 11 years in, she gave me a big hug, said she loved me, and said she needed to run to the grocery store. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, and I was served papers. Long story short, her lawyer turned the divorce nasty. She demanded insanely intrusive discovery. Once she refused to retract it, I demanded the same of her. That discovery process uncovered 4 separate affairs that began at the 8-year mark. When the settlement was finally agreed upon, she changed her mind and wanted to stay married. She refused to sign the papers. I was a hard no on that and kept the pressure on. So 6 figures in legal fees and 7 figures in asset splits later, here I am. Story 10. Off topic. Been married 30 years. It evolves. You aren't the couple you were pre-kids. You aren't the couple you were when everyone was healthy. You aren't the couple that travels every weekend like you used to. It takes thinking, reflection, and communication. We have had so many highs and lows, but when I woke up next to her, I couldn't imagine that being anyone else. She loves me. I love her. We would die for each other. We go on trips without each other, girls' trips, golf trips, etc., and we are fine with that. We need our together time and our alone time. We understand that about each other. If you get to an unhappy place, stop and think about it. Talk to a friend or brother. Figure out why. For me, it was clearly work. I wasn't in control at work, so I had to be in control at home. That caused so many battles at home, unnecessary battles, damaging battles. But once I figured out that work was the problem, I fixed it. Life was better. I could go on for days. I'll just say that marriage is work, and in my case, 100% worth it. There will never be another like her. Story 11. I just got tired of never feeling supported. I constantly felt invalidated, especially during a health crisis that nearly ended my life. My ex didn't believe me when I said something was wrong and chose to believe the doctors who said I had anxiety. I ended up going on many ER trips alone, and it honestly tore me apart that I had no support and everyone treated me like I was crazy. Turns out I have May-Thurner syndrome and was battling a huge blood clot in my left leg, which severely impacted my circulation and made me weak, raised my heart rate, and gave me an impending sense of doom. No one was on my side until I had 2 pulmonary embolisms at work. By that time, I was crying to myself to sleep alone in our guest room and crying all the way to work. My leg was purple, but it was always shrugged off. The day I had my PEs, I could barely get my pants over my leg without screaming. He even seemed annoyed that he had to take me to the ER. We worked at the same company. I cried all the way to the parking lot as he walked 10 feet in front of me. They scanned my lungs and found 2 large clots, then discovered I had a clot from my belly button to my left ankle. I was never able to forgive him for that, and he didn't want to talk about it in therapy years later because it made him feel bad. I'm surprised I made it as long as I did. Story 12. She was my narcissistic abuser. After my dad passed, I got very depressed and started therapy. Therapy opened a lot about my childhood trauma and how my wife was treating me exactly how my mom used to. I became mentally stronger and started setting boundaries, then began sticking to them. She became very abusive, then less. One day she asked for an open marriage. She said it was that or divorce. I chose divorce. It shocked her, apparently. I later found out she had already found her next victim. Listen, y'all. Life got dark. Life got hard. Therapy is incredible, and there's amazingness out there. I began dating a close friend long distance. We got married at 21. She is the partner I always wanted. She supports me as I support her. We have a beautiful daughter. Life gets so much better. Story 13. After a ton of counseling and introspection, we realized we both made decisions early in the relationship not to move on, and that neither of us was probably ever going to get what we needed from the other. We are just that different. She should never have moved in with me. I should never have invited her to move in with me. Heck, when she didn't say she loved me back the first time I said it, I should have moved on. There were many points along the way where I should have moved on. It just took me about 24 years to realize my happiness is important. I had to make the divorce happen. Otherwise, I'd be on my deathbed without having had genuinely loving touch for even more decades. Story 14. Not divorced but separated. She disappeared one day with the kids, falsely accused me of being emotionally abusive, went through my emails, cloud storage, messages, and location history, and refused to let me even see my kids for over a month. The reason? Apparently, in sickness and in health doesn't apply to mental health. The irony is that my mental health has vastly improved since she left. It'll be our 17th anniversary in August if we aren't divorced already by then. Story 15. I think divorces are like motorcycle accidents in that there is not one cause, but a combination of things that, without one or two of them, might happen differently. The moment that truly ended for me was when my ex-wife became so offended that she screamed at our therapist and accused him of being unprofessional and unethical, saying that we shouldn't get divorced. Story 16. After over a decade of supporting her lifestyle of trips, jewelry, and whatever she wanted while she didn't work and we had no kids, she said she wanted to open our relationship. I even agreed to it because, honestly, I wanted more intimacy and I didn't have trouble finding it. However, while she was happy seeing other people, she became quite upset when I did. That wasn't bad enough, though. She also started lying, or maybe she had always lied but finally slipped up and I started catching her. Story 17. A textbook case of growing apart. Looking back, I realized I married someone whose core values weren't compatible with mine. But at the time, I saw myself as easygoing and adaptable. So I figured we could overcome those differences because love conquers all, right? Spoiler alert, no it doesn't. I spent 2 decades losing my identity. We both felt very alone in our relationship and ultimately could not repair the distance. Story 18. I caught her somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. I then went home, locked myself in a room with a pen and paper, and began planning my divorce. Leaving the marriage turned out to be one of the best decisions I have ever made in life. My current partner and I have 0 issues and we just click. As for my ex, we occasionally see her at an annual convention here, trying to take our picture. An old neighbor told me she is supported by her 70-year-old sugar daddy. Story 19. The catalyst was me catching her cheating on me just shy of 13 years in. She wasn't sorry about it, just like she generally wasn't ever sorry about anything. That made me rethink the whole situation, and the reality was that we looked perfect on paper, but in real life it was almost never a functioning partnership and I was miserable. In fairness, she didn't want to stay together either. We have 2 kids and co-parents, well, so I'm grateful for that. Honestly, I think having a court order defining our respective rights and obligations makes it easier to get along because she can't just dictate how things will be. We must compromise and agree. Story 20. I will try to be as fair and honest as possible. I have been married for 20 years. There was no infidelity. Even after everything, she would say I was a great father. I am a good earner and worked the entire time we were married. There was no physical abuse, just normal marital life. Relationships take work. For the first 10 years, I did the work, and generally she did too. Around that time, after we had kids, she seemed to enter a phase where our relationship no longer mattered. We were about 35 at the time. She would have been happy living parallel lives, and if I had accepted that, we would probably still be married. My happiness didn't matter. It felt like she just wanted to go through the motions until we died without really being a couple anymore. It showed in the intimacy department, but it was everywhere. Over the next 10 years, I tried to bridge the gap and let her know what was important to me. She wouldn't budge. Over that time, bitterness started to grow. Fights lasted longer. I slowly stopped doing the things I had been doing to make it all work. Eventually, she reached the point where I wasn't worth the trouble anymore, and we divorced. I want to make it clear that there was her side, and then there was my side. I didn't suddenly go crazy. I would never have left my kids. I loved her and was serious about making the marriage work. It taught me a lot. First, it doesn't matter how good you are or how hard you try. The children won't matter, and the impact on them won't matter either. People often just look out for themselves. They aren't always interested in compromise. Your efforts won't be appreciated if you are not meeting their needs, and they may not meet you halfway. I think once she had the kids she wanted, she checked out. I wasn't needed anymore. In her risk calculation, she knew I would still be a good dad and continue to help financially. To her, I had become emotional baggage, a chore she had to deal with, and the outcome of that chore was not worth the effort she would need to put in. Story 21. Before we married, we talked a lot about the future and agreed on a few key things. Not having kids immediately, living a few years in another country, the city in our country where we would live long term. As soon as we got married, she started pressuring me to have kids. We eventually had 1 son, which canceled the plan to move overseas. When our child was 2 years old, she began pressuring us to move back to the city where her parents live. I slowly gave in to most of her requests until one day I realized she had never been interested in living the life we had originally agreed on. She had lied and manipulated me from even before we got married and constantly made me feel guilty about everything. So I decided to separate and later divorce her. When I looked back, more than 10 years of our lives had passed. I do love my son, but I feel like I was robbed of the life I wanted to live. Story 22. She admitted what I had always suspected. She had always wanted to be with a woman. She gave me an ultimatum to either let her try other partners or get divorced. I made the wrong choice and said I didn't want to get divorced. She and her new partner then teamed up to accuse me of being emotionally abusive, which in Washington state is considered domestic violence. I lost custody of the daughter I had raised from birth to 5 years old during a hearing I wasn't even allowed to attend, after she had abandoned us for 17 days and refused to speak to her own daughter. It has been 4.5 years and I am still fighting for my little girl to have a father in her life. Story 23. After 20 years, social media led her into an emotional affair that I caught her in. We got past it, but then she felt entitled to be happy. She stopped helping around the house, started buying tons of fancy clothes, began wearing a lot of makeup and getting dressed up. She had been an earth angel hippie. She started taking selfies and posting them so people would tell her how pretty she was. She became obsessed with IG and FB and felt the need to prove how awesome everything was or compare her life to others. She basically decided to burn the house down so she could find happiness. In short, she had a midlife crisis and turned into a very narcissistic person. She didn't like my character traits anymore and said I was like an old car. She needed a newer model. It was awful. The worst part is I still must see and speak to her all the time because of our kids. She even came clean and said she knew how badly she messed up and was open to dating me again. Yeah, there's the door. Story 24. 23 years here. The ending came down to how incompatible we are. We raised our kids and now we are moving on. She asked for a divorce and I wasn't about to fight it. She was unhappy, it seems. And my kids and I still don't understand why. She is going to go her way, and my daughters are coming with me. Their choice. They should be in college right now, but we're going to move after I sell this house. No reason to stay around here. Story 25. I had been taking care of her dad. Her mom had just passed away, and she wasn't handling it well. One day she came in with my daughter and said I had been a godsend, but that she wanted a divorce. She wouldn't give a reason. Apparently, those evenings when she said she was going out with friends or visiting her daughters were spent with her boyfriend. Story 26. My wife became more controlling. In the end, she told me I was going to get an allowance. Keep in mind, I only went to lunch a couple of times a week and wasn't a bar person, so my weekly expenses were less than $100. She wanted to limit me to $20. I made about $140,000 a year, and the allowance didn't apply to her. That was only one of the reasons. There were many. Story 27. I am currently getting divorced right at the decade mark because my wife and my best friend decided they were soulmates and chose to destroy both families. After trying to understand how my happy marriage changed so suddenly, I believe she is addicted to Adderall and alcohol, but is really covering up deep, unresolved childhood trauma. It has been completely devastating to watch two of the most important people in my life change so drastically and to not see my young children half the time. Story 28. My wife became completely convinced that I cheated on her. She believes it happened while she was pregnant with our second child. I never cheated on her. The accusations started shortly after our second child was born. She threatened to take the kids to live with her parents and use the court to make sure I never saw them again. I know it was unhealthy and showed a lack of self-respect, but I couldn't give up on my kids. I needed to be in their lives for at least some part of their childhood. They were about 2.5 years old and just a few months old when it began. So I tried to convince my ex-wife that I had never cheated. I failed for 8 years. During that time, I followed every abusive demand she made because I thought it might prove my loyalty and eventually change her mind. It never did. For 8 years, I had to go straight home after work. I couldn't spend time with coworkers or have hobbies outside the home. Slowly, I became isolated from friends and family. When we got married, we agreed to save money for a big celebration and vacation on our 10-year anniversary instead of spending it all right away. When the pandemic arrived and we had to homeschool the kids around that time, we sold our house and bought an RV. I left my 6-figure job, and we decided to travel the country and get away from people. It was amazing. It had been our dream for a decade, something most people never get to experience. Eventually, we parked the RV in a trailer park a few minutes from her parents' house. The plan was to stay a few weeks to visit. Weeks turned into months. The kids loved spending nights with their grandparents. Then my ex started staying there overnight too, first a day, then 2, then a week. I thought it was good that they were spending time together. Then she served me divorce papers. At that moment, I finally did what I should have done the first time she accused me of cheating. I let her walk away. Life is too short. The marriage had ended long before that, when she decided she would never believe me about something that never happened. 12 years wasted. Story 29. I found out she was having an affair. That was what technically ended it. But the real reason behind the scenes was that she felt the relationship had run its course, and she had largely fallen out of love with me. It was a terrible way to end 25 years of marriage and over 30 years together, but that's how it happened. We get along well as friends now, funnily enough, but that's mainly because we have kids, and we are both committed to being there for them. I suspect that over time our contact will naturally fade as we move on with our own lives. Still, we had some good times as well as bad ones, and honestly, I am much happier now outside that marriage. Story 32 years, and it took me far too long to leave. We had a dead bedroom for almost a decade, but that wasn't really the main issue. He became like another child, and I was doing everything. We had 2 disabled sons, and he left me to work, care for them, manage the house, and handle everything else. When he started becoming verbally abusive toward me, my son and our daughter, I wanted to leave. I stayed, but eventually I found the courage when things got worse, and I saw what it was doing to my daughter. I needed to show her strength, and that we should not accept less than the bare minimum. I became sick, and if it weren't for my now brother-in-law, I wouldn't have had help. He drove me everywhere and helped with many things. He showed me compassion and care, and that made me realize where I stood with my husband. Now at 53, I am engaged to a wonderful man who gives me everything I ever wanted. The saying is true, if a man wants to, he will. The last 2 years have been lessons. I encourage people to leave, get therapy, and remember that you are worth fighting for. Story 31. Apparently, I oppressed my ex-wife by allowing her to stay home and raise our kids while I supported the family with one income. Once our kids were old enough to attend school full-time, I asked her to find a job. When her free ride ended, so did our marriage. Later, I learned from some of her friends that her goal had always been to find a man with a good job so she could stay home and never have to work. Story 32. After 12 years, many things in our lives had changed because of children and buying an old house, but she was unwilling to make the adjustments needed to keep the relationship healthy. We spent 3 years in therapy and she still refused to compromise on even small things. We separated amicably and the kids are doing well. But the lesson is simple. Don't get married if you are not willing to adapt to life's changes. One person cannot carry the entire relationship. Story 33. After 13 years together, he came out as a trans man. I want to make it clear that I fully support his decision to live the life he wants. He came out in 20 and we are only now beginning the divorce process. I spent that entire time trying to make things work, even agreeing to open the marriage so he could date as a man. I am straight, but I tried to love the person rather than the gender. In the end, it just wasn't sustainable. Story 34. We should never have married in the first place, but the kids kept us together. I was never able to fully let my guard down with him, mostly because he was an abusive narcissist. He became frustrated with the lack of intimacy between us, and that only caused me to withdraw even more. Eventually, he began emotionally cheating, and that led me to become an alcoholic. Finally, we both admitted it was time to end things. It would have been 23 years this December. Story 35. It wasn't quite a decade, but almost 9 years. I bought us a house by myself and handled nearly everything. For a long time, things seemed happy, but it took me years to recognize the manipulation and gaslighting. Therapy and a psychiatrist helped me understand my own mental health and see the situation clearly. Once I started confronting her about her behavior, everything quickly went downhill. She pushed me into a very dark place. She had cheated before and I forgave her, but near the end she was already in another relationship and had even secured a new rental. She tried to manipulate me again into staying, crying and begging. I stayed calm and didn't react. That's when she punched me in the face, and that was the moment I knew I was done. It also turns out we were never legally married, and I'm still sorting that out. Be careful out there. And men, go to therapy, even if only once a month. It helps to have someone to talk to. Story 36. After 11 years of ups and downs, with things getting worse during the last 3 or 4 years, I discovered that she had shared some deep personal issues I had been working through with other people, and not in a supportive way. I had believed those people were my friends, but the messages made it clear they were only her friends. The pile-on against me was devastating. Combined with all the other dramas we had been dealing with, I realized I needed something different. I needed to rebuild my independence and learn to love myself again, because over the years she had slowly eroded my self-worth. I had given her a good life, but she focused only on what I wasn't doing, instead of everything I was. Story 37. After 20 years within a 34-year marriage, she had an emotional affair with a church employee who had mental health problems and encouraged her to cope with them through alcohol. I managed to stop the affair, but her drinking turned into full-blown alcoholism. She was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. When she drank, which began every day around 3 in the afternoon and lasted until she passed out, she often became violent. It was tragic because she had once been a kind and caring person. I endured it for as long as I could, helped the kids get settled outside the house, and eventually left. Story 38. There were many issues on both sides, but the biggest one involved fertility problems. At first, she was fine with the situation when she thought the problem was mine. When we learned that the issue was hers, she fell into a deep depression. I couldn't help her out with it, and she refused to seek real help. She lost her motivation, eventually quit her job, and stopped trying while I worked 2 jobs and attended night school just to keep up with the mortgage and basic expenses. Story 39. In my parents' case, it began with my dad's affair. Unfortunately, I can understand some of what led to it. My mom refused to communicate, had very high expectations, and believed everyone should be able to read her mind. She also never allowed us to visit my dad's side of the family. My dad wasn't good at communicating either. They argued constantly, called each other names, and refused to work on themselves or the marriage. After my dad returned from Iraq around 2004, they tried again. We even took some nice vacations together. In the end, though, he still had an affair. Now my dad is in therapy for PTSD and attending marriage counseling with my stepmom. My mom still refuses therapy and remains emotionally immature. Story 40. 11 years in, and I was told in the expensive hotel room I had booked for her birthday, our first real chance to get away from our young kids, that she no longer felt that way about me. The main reason? I didn't read her mind. This came after years of supporting her while she was sick, through 4 pregnancies and raising 2 kids while also caring for the children and working a stressful job that paid our bills. I made the mistake of encouraging her to go out with friends because she had lost many over the years and only had her sister, a grade A sociopath, and her parents. She had already started an affair with a guy from work before telling me, then proceeded to lie to my face about it and allowed me to drag us through couples counseling with zero intention of changing anything. 9 months later, I discovered an email confirming that she had purchased a DIY divorce kit. The final twist was that shortly after telling me all this, she went to my parents and told them they would have to choose between throwing her and the kids out or me, since we were renting the family home from my parents. My parents, of course, didn't tell me this until more than a year later. The upside is that I'm much happier now. My kids love me, and life is good. Story 41. We were married for 11 years. Our family life was complicated and exhausting because 3 members of the family were handicapped. Outsiders, especially people from her family, constantly interfered in our situation and believed they were always right, which eventually caused a major fight and led to our divorce. Interestingly, we have been living together for 23 years since the divorce, and we keep those troublesome people at bay by maintaining limited contact. As a side note, those same people's families are now complete disasters, while we are thriving. Story 42. I have been married for more than 20 years, but during the last 7 or so, she put in no effort. By that point, about 13 years into the marriage, I worked 60 hours a week while still doing my share of the housework. I cooked about half the time, did the laundry, and almost always washed the dishes. I vacuumed because she said it hurt her back, and I handled all the grocery shopping. She constantly complained about her job, came home in a bad mood, and took it out on me and the kids. Since I made good money, we decided she would retire and take over the household responsibilities. She didn't. The house was always a mess. I still did laundry when I ran out of clean clothes, cooked about half the time, and handled other chores because they simply needed to be done. The worst part was that she refused to participate in decision-making and expected me to handle everything. She wouldn't even get burgers for the kids without asking me first. Eventually, I had an affair. I'm not proud of it. While counseling, I realized I didn't want to fix the marriage anymore. I no longer respected her as an equal partner. Story 43. I am still on the path toward what will probably become a divorce, but the issue is religion. I consider myself somewhat spiritual, but my wife is Protestant and the way she practices it has become overwhelming. A lot of her money and time goes toward it, and we can't agree on anything anymore because her worldview revolves around a closed box where Jesus is the answer to everything and nothing else exists. It wasn't like this before our child was born, which makes it even more concerning for me. Story 44. She had postnatal depression, which led to several years of very unpleasant behaviors that eventually destroyed my love for her, although I didn't realize it at the time. Afterward, she still experienced a significant and lasting personality change. It wasn't her fault, but she was no longer the woman I had married. During that time, I also sought counseling for some of my own issues, and I changed as well, hopefully for the better. In the end, we simply weren't the same people anymore, and the love was gone. Ending the marriage was the right decision, even though it was very hard on the kids. Story 45. She cheated after about 27-28 years. I 60, don't know why, never got an apology or a reason, but for some reason, everything I did around that time was wrong. Doing dishes, laundry, or yard work was somehow wrong. She was even angry at the money I made. Not that I made too little, but because my retirement and disability equaled more than what she made as a daycare teacher, not counting my regular paycheck in which I worked part-time and still made a decent wage. It paid the bills and a family vacation every year. If I had to guess, and this is just a stab in the dark, she had a midlife crisis about our last kid leaving home. She wasn't going to be a mom with a kid at home anymore. We had 6 kids, and she had always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and she was for a very long time. In the end, she was mad about that too. Depending on the conversation, she was mad about not having a career because she was a stay-at-home mom, which she had always wanted, or when the kids were older, she started working in daycare, not for the money, but to be around kids, and it would be for only a year or two, and then she would stay home for a year or two until she found another daycare to work at. But now she will say she had to work, which she didn't, and missed out on whatever the older kids were doing. Well, her boyfriend had 2 kids, one about 8 or 9, and the other one about 5, I think. She married him in 2019, less than 2 months after our divorce was finalized. Time does heal, and having a great therapist helps. Story 46. My ex-husband was emotionally immature, unstable, and abusive. I spent our marriage putting up with him constantly disrespecting me by telling me I wasn't good enough in one way or another. He often talked about my weight or different parts of my body in a disparaging way, even though I looked amazing. After insulting me, the very next minute he would say I looked great, that I was sexy, and that I could get any man I wanted. When I attended pole dance classes for more than 2 hours, 6 days a week instead of going to a traditional gym, he said I didn't really work out. When I went to the gym, he told me the same thing. When we worked out together, he became angry because he said I wasn't taking things seriously since I was being playful and flirtatious with him. He didn't like when I initiated intimacy. He said I was too aggressive, yet when I asked him to show me how he liked it to be done, he refused. When I eventually stopped initiating, he complained that we had a marriage with no intimacy, even though we were doing it about once a week. He expected me to always want to do things with him whenever he wanted, but when we were together, he was often in a bad mood or easily upset if the smallest thing didn't go his way. He once asked if we could get a dog. The dog is very sweet but highly reactive. He would snap at me whenever I asked him to walk the dog with me, and he watched me struggle to take care of it, while using his job as a military police officer as an excuse for why he didn't have time. I even planned an all-expenses-paid trip to Yellowstone for us. During the trip, he complained that I hadn't planned specific activities inside the park. The day before we left, I had texted him explaining that I hadn't yet had time to plan the details but wanted to do it together during the plane ride. That evening, he came home with an itinerary he had created by himself. I was grateful but also confused because we were supposed to plan it together. Then once we arrived, he threw it in my face that I hadn't planned anything. During one of our worst arguments, I became so overwhelmed after he told me I hadn't accomplished anything since finishing graduate school, even though he doesn't even have a bachelor's degree, that I had a panic attack. I left and stayed on an Airbnb for almost a week. Later, I discovered that while I was away trying to calm my nervous system, he had taken our carpet cleaner to the house of a female coworker who had torn her ACL. On another occasion, I went on a work trip and didn't text him for 4 hours because I was driving with coworkers from Omaha to Kearney. When I arrived at the hotel, I texted him, and even though he hadn't called or messaged me, he exploded at me for not contacting him sooner. I had spoken to him only a few weeks earlier about not starting conversations with arguments, but even when I explained that I had been driving, he wouldn't calm down. I broke up with him then, although not for the final time. The last time I ended things, he was belittling me again, claiming I didn't appreciate him and wasn't there for him emotionally, and saying he had to rely on his friends for the support I should have provided. At that point, he had been out of the country on a hardship tour for almost 6 months, and during that time I had experienced how peaceful life felt without him. That break helped me realize just how unhappy I truly was. He even mocked me for asking him to repeat his weekly plans so I could write them down, despite knowing that I have ADHD and need notes to remember details, something he had criticized me for in the past. That moment became the final straw. Being away from him felt like a huge relief and gave me the mental space to understand how miserable I had been and how much a part of me dreaded the idea of him coming home. My ex-husband was emotionally immature, unstable, and abusive. I was codependent and too emotionally immature at the time to fully acknowledge and take responsibility for my own feelings of disgust, anger, and sadness about the marriage. We both entered the relationship with low self-esteem and unresolved trauma. I believed I had to earn his love while giving him mine freely. I felt sorry for him and excused his behavior as he projected his own pain and insecurity onto me. Even if that explanation was partly true, it never made his behavior acceptable. It took me a long time to understand that there was no excuse for how he treated me and no reason I should ever have tolerated it. Story 47. Going to sleep at different times, spending time separately with different groups of friends, sleeping in separate rooms, and seeing affection and intimacy drop to zero with only one partner fighting to make it work. Now we are very good friends and co-parents exceptionally well. We celebrate holidays, organize playdates, and attend birthdays together, always presenting a united front for our children. We are better co-parents than partners. Story 48. She carried out many issues from her upbringing, which were not entirely her fault, but they manifested in toxic behavior. I was too naive to recognize this when we were dating and stayed too long because of the children. Long story short, we went to therapy, and the doctor requested to see just her for a while. 6 months later, he called me in and said that for my mental health, I needed to leave. It was a brutal divorce. Story 49. For the last 2 years of our 20-year marriage, my spouse went on a spending spree, racking up thousands of dollars in credit card debt, and began drinking excessively every night. Attempts to discuss therapy or rehab always ended in arguments, with her trying to blame me for the situation. Eventually, I just gave up. Story 50. My mother cheated on my father and left him when I was very young. Her second husband was a meth addict, which contributed to the chaos. My dad didn't want to divorce my mom. His second wife was abusive and a money grabber, which drove him into alcoholism. His third wife left him because of his drinking. Divorce clearly runs in the family. I've now been married 11 years. Marriage requires work, and love isn't always a feeling. You must show up and do the hard work, even when the butterflies fade. Of course, this doesn't excuse abuse. I hope to show my 4 children something different from what I witnessed, especially since my husband's dad left his mom for another woman. Story 51. I was financially better off, so I thought it was only fair that I took care of her. I paid for nearly everything: house, holidays, bills, wedding, and honeymoon. But after our children arrived, she kept requesting things we could not afford: private childcare, enrichment courses, expensive vacations. It was stressful as I worked hard to pay the bills, while she, though employed, could not stick to a budget, splurging on facials, retreats, and self-care packages costing thousands. She would then blame me for always working and never spending enough time with her or the kids. Eventually, I simply broke down. Story 52. 14 years in, she developed severe depression and refused therapy, unwilling to admit any fault. She stayed in bed, neglected work, cooking, cleaning, and caring for our children. She went to visit her mother for 4 hours away with the boys and did not return. Her mother enabled her, yet I foolishly tried to make it work for another 9 months. In hindsight, I should have ended it the moment she left. However, that would have limited the boys' contact with their mother since she was unwilling to stay nearby. We essentially gave away our house with no profit. I moved close by, obtained 50-50 custody, and paid her $2,000 per month in child support while she works part-time at a golf course. At least the boys have both parents in their lives, which is a positive. Story 53. My ex have decided to stop contributing to the family, which included 3 children, except for screaming and yelling at everyone while aggressively refusing help whenever it was offered. Meanwhile, I was running a small business and pursuing an associate's degree. She deliberately sabotaged a small business that was generating $13,000 per month by using the company's social media accounts in a public, destructive way. After we experienced homelessness, which was incredibly difficult with children, she became physically violent toward our 9-year-old. This occurred 5 years ago. The last time she was involved with the family, we separated immediately. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago. She even voluntarily abdicated her parental rights. Story 54. This one happened to me twice. The first time, after 14 years of marriage, he was pastor of one of the largest churches in town and chose to have an affair with a member. I did not want to divorce and harm our children, who were 9 and 12, but he could not wait to leave the marriage for her. The second time, which I never expected, occurred when I traveled out of state to care for my young adult child diagnosed with cancer. He claimed I had abandoned my life and that he had taken a back seat to your kids one too many times. He then fought tooth and nail to maximize his share of the house sale. I now view marriage as a joke. I am older, perhaps a bit bitter, and no longer cares. Story 55. Addiction. We met during the height of the opioid epidemic. It began as casual fun but devolved into a vicious cycle of backstabbing and euphoria. She has since passed away, years after our divorce, and her family still blames me, despite my being 11 years clean. I have moved on to a happier life, but I still struggle with what could have been if we had both stayed clean. If you ever require surgery or sustain an injury, please. I will take Motrin. Story 56. We were married 20 years and divorced 3. We were simply never a good match. We had children, endured hardships together, and did our best. As we aged, we realized the compromises were no longer worth it. I think we were lonely when we met and afraid of being alone. She overlooked aspects she did not like about me. I overlooked what I did not like about her. Year after year, minor annoyances grew into frustrations. Frustrations turned into resentments. And ultimately, to be happy, we recognized we had to divorce. In the end, there were a few good years. I have 2 wonderful children from the marriage, so I have no regrets. Story 57. I have been married for 12 years. She was a fundamentally unhappy person. I married her because I was needy and had been single for a long time and ignored a bunch of red flags. The first half of the relationship was fine, but she slowly began just wallowing in sorrow all the time. My biggest regret is just sitting there waiting for her to snap out of it, and so I missed out on doing a lot of things I wanted to do. Luckily, I have a wonderful partner now who is a happy person and wants to do stuff. Story 58. Not yet divorced, but taking a break. Many things happened to my wife, and she probably has depression and/or burnout. We were basically living like roommates. There is a third party, a woman, involved. The intimacy with me is out of the question, but just fine with a different person. So I have started looking around as well, and it feels like I got out of some black hole. Feel more motivation and energy. We get along fine, but I'm not sure if I really want to continue. Things got hard, and most likely the wife's general anxiety is way overwhelming even if she gets better. Last 5 years really made me emotionally burned out. Story 59. Emotional and verbal abuse. It had been going on for years, but it was only after I finally started seeing a therapist that I came to realize it was happening. The therapist point-blank told me in our first session, "You realize you are being emotionally and verbally abused, right? We were married for 28 years, but I have no regrets. I am so damn happy now I can hardly believe it. I probably didn't have to go through what I did to find my wife now, but even if I did, it's so good I would say it was worth it." Story 60. Wow, where do I even start? So yeah, we were married for just over 10 years. Honestly, we had a good run. It wasn't some dramatic, screaming, plate-flying kind of breakup. It was more like we slowly turned into roommates who were just good at coexisting. At first, everything felt easy, you know? We had fun, built a life, shared the same goals, but over time we kind of stopped growing in the same direction. Anyway, we tried therapy, date nights, and the whole deal. But in the end, we realized we were holding each other back more than lifting each other up. So we split. It was weirdly peaceful. We still check in occasionally, with no bad blood. Just two people who used to love each other and outgrew the version of themselves they were when they met. Story 61. After 11 years of marriage, 15 together total, and being cheated on 5 times that I found out about, I woke up and realized this is who he is as a person, and nothing I do will ever make him faithful. That, and I needed our son to see that this type of behavior isn't okay from someone who claims they love you. I had to learn to love and respect myself and knew I would never reach that point while married to my ex. Story 62. Together for almost 20 years. We went long distances a couple years ago for me to pursue a degree abroad. After year 3 living apart, I started treating him like I was being treated. I did the same frequency of communication, same level of sharing, same level of attention. I would say yes to all communication if it was initiated by them though. There was no fight. I'm in 5 months of this. The ex expressed divorce wishes because of feeling lonely. We lasted a couple of more years until it was clear to me that no effort would be made from the other side. The divorce was final last month. I could have tried harder, possibly, but sometimes enough is enough. When we talked, ex said they also wanted to divorce but did not know to say it. There are limits on how much you will be willing in taking initiative, and I discovered my limit. Story 63. Together 25 years, married 12. Found out he was having an affair with a coworker while I was a stay-at-home mom with a toddler and an infant. He controlled the money I could spend but couldn't see the statements. This was before internet access. Got suspicious and discovered he mismanaged all our accounts and put us $100,000 in the hole. We divorced. I kept the house and kids. He kept the mistress and the debt. He's still with her and is miserable. Does whatever he can to stay out of the house and away from her. Our kids tolerate him. I, on the other hand, am married to an amazing man that adores me and my kids, and they adore him. Life is wonderful. Story 64. He decided the 23-year-old with 2 small kids was the best match for him. We were married almost 25 years of the 26 years we were together, and our twins were 20. He moved out, and 6 months later I had to serve him with divorce papers because he barely communicated with me. The statistics saying it's mostly women who file for divorce is missing context. He decided the marriage was over and thought leaving the shared home was enough to prove that. There are legalities that must be taken care of, and some of these men can't be bothered to properly end the marriage by filing when it was their decision to be done with the union. Story 65. There were an age difference and a power imbalance. He was much older that I didn't understand until it was too late. As it turns out, our life goals didn't align. Even though we talked extensively about them in the beginning, we were thrust into tons of situational chaos right after our wedding, and it didn't let up for over a decade. We did counseling, etc., but when the dust settled, I realized we weren't compatible at all. A marriage must prioritize both people, and I realized my life would always be only about its needs and desires. I needed to reclaim my life. Story 66. When I realized after 13 years that I was not his priority, he had always put his work and even his friends' needs above mine, despite the last few years of begging for change. When I finally gave him an ultimatum, he quietly went to work and didn't come home for 2 days, stayed with his best friend, acted like none of it ever happened, and continued as usual. I was out. Story 67. One of the many reasons for me was that when my dad started radiation treatments, I didn't even tell my then husband. He wouldn't have supported me in any way. I ended up feeling like it would just put a bigger burden on me if I were hoping for support and not getting it, rather than just not asking for it. After he was done with treatment, it highlighted how we just weren't partners anymore. 20+ years later. Story 68. I was a married single mom who was working 60 hours a week and carrying 100% of the mental, physical, and emotional workload while my husband worked from home, but still couldn't be bothered to do literally anything. Couldn't take out the garbage, shower more than once a week, make a grocery list, do dishes, literally anything. Story 69. Not married but long-term relationship. I was too faithful. She had once, while she was drunk, suggested we could see other people in a casual way. And when I told her why I would want that when I already have the most beautiful woman I know, which I really meant, she dropped the topic. Apparently she remembered the drunken conversation, but rather than having the conversation seriously and sober, she let it fester and eventually decided to see other people without consulting me. I probably should have seen the red flags when girls' weeks/weekends away or long business trips started being more common, but I guess I just believed her as she'd always done them anyway, so them being longer or more common didn't feel suspicious, and she was happy when she came back, which made me happy. Then she was surprised I was upset when I found out about her sleeping around. I only found out when one of my single co-workers bumped into her on a dating site and told me about it. Apparently it was my fault for being able to just love one person at a time. I was limiting her life choices and couldn't understand how you can be in love with more than one person. I was just too bland to be the only person for her, not even meant in physical ways, just in general as a person, which really hurt. How she wanted to be with me sometimes, but not always. I was her comfort blanket, but she wanted adventure, blah blah blah. How, if I really loved her, I'd understand and let her be a free bird, but always leave the window open for her to return. Well, she's free to love as many people as she likes now, but the metaphorical window has been firmly closed. I'm guessing it's not going as well as she'd like. She's twice tried to come back to me since saying she's worked it out of her system. No thanks. The things she said still hurt years later. I've moved on from her mentally. She's still cute in looks, I'll admit, and I'd rather remain single than take her back. Story 70. We were together for 10 years, we bought a house and had a child. Just before our child was born, she left her job and never returned to the workforce. She chose to be a stay-at-home mom, and I took on the financial responsibility alone. Over time, resentment grew. She felt I was lucky to leave the house each day, while I felt she was lucky to stay home. Both of us contributed to the imbalance in household responsibilities, but I began to feel replaced emotionally by our child. She saw nothing wrong with this. Eventually, we felt more like roommates raising a child than a couple in love. During this time, I developed feelings for a coworker. It turned into an emotional affair, although I did not recognize it as such immediately. I viewed it as a warning sign. I confessed to my wife not because I wanted out, but because I wanted to fix things. I told her I did not want to feel this way about someone else, and that our relationship needed attention. Her response was, "That's your problem." I then began therapy. I learned about depression, myself, and the relationship models I had grown up with. I had internalized the idea that as a man I was supposed to sacrifice happiness for duty, and that wanting more from life was selfish. Therapy taught me that it is okay to aspire, to desire partnership, and to seek joy. However, this personal growth widened the gap between us. I wanted her to return to work so we could build a better life together for ourselves and our children. She refused. To her, our problems were still only my problems. Eventually, I returned to the other woman. I am not proud of it, but I want to be honest. She made me feel valued, seen, and heard in ways I had not experienced for a long time. When my wife discovered our renewed contact, everything came to a head. I expressed my deep unhappiness and shame at seeking emotional support elsewhere. I asked her, if we did not have a child, where we would be. She admitted she did not know. When I asked what would happen when our child grew up and moved on, she confessed she had never thought about it. So I left. I dated the other woman for a while. It did not last, but I am grateful to her. She helped me grow more in a shorter time than I had in years. We remain friends. Eventually, I met the woman who is now my wife. She is everything I hoped for in a partner. We have a wonderful life, a loving relationship built on mutual respect, shared goals, and emotional connection. We support each other, communicate, and build together. My ex is now in a long-term relationship with someone better suited to her. We have had honest conversations, and we are both happier than we ever were together. Most importantly, we co-parent effectively, and our child thrives in two loving, stable homes. I share this not for sympathy, but in the hope that someone might gain insight from my experience. Here is what I have learned. 1. Relationships evolve. What you want at 25 may not be what you need at 40, and that is okay. Both partners must grow and adapt together. If values and visions do not align, the relationship may not last. 2. Emotional affairs are real and dangerous. If you seek connection elsewhere, it is a warning sign that something is missing and will not fix itself. 3. Divorce is not failure. It is not always tragic or shameful. Sometimes it is necessary and even healthy, especially when efforts to repair the relationship are not reciprocated. 4. Children should never be glued. They need happy, emotionally healthy parents, not merely parents who stay together for their sake. A strong partnership is the best gift you can give a child. 5. Keep dating your spouse. Intimacy, appreciation, and connection do not maintain themselves. Relationships require active investment, or they quietly erode until they collapse. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.